Hello, everyone. It's great to be here. That's Lance Bultena. My name is Patrick Ayat, and Hogan Lovells is a law firm. But don't be scared, don't run away. We'll keep it crisp. If it gets boring, there are beautiful cushions here. You can even take a nap. And if you think you should say something or take over, just come on stage and proceed. Now, to win, understand government. That's our title. IAA is all about mobility. It's all about innovation. And we truly believe that this is the same also for the law. We are not here to talk about existing laws. We want to talk with you about how also from a regulatory perspective we need to shape the future of mobility. So Lance will take us through the big picture, a couple of slides, and then I will take us through a couple of slides on electric vehicles and autonomous vehicles. So Lance, over to you.
All right, let's start with a little thought exercise. Imagine a time when the mobility industry and the auto sector could focus on the consumer. Because after all, when the conference was opened, it started out with IAA. It's all about mobility. It's all about you, the consumer. But it's been a while since we've been able to think that way. Remember that time when supply chains were secure? That's not been the case since Fukushima in 2011. When costs were predictable and tending to trend down. Now with tariffs, our cost cycles in a challenging mode. Or our technology, it was known. Mechanical and electrical engineering, we crushed it. Now software-defined vehicles and a new way of thinking. And finally, and maybe most significantly, the role of government. Regulation used to be really pretty accommodating. We had to worry about compliance, but we could leap over it pretty well, and government cared a lot about the automotive sector. That's not our world now. We have to start exploring why. And when we look at this chart, that gear of government policy is driving the business environment and thus the technology we work at. Every year when CEOs are surveyed, they're asked, will the role of government increase next year? And every year they say yes, and every year they're right. That trend's continuing. So now we have to look at what that means for us on the next slide. This conference is really about B2C, but our thesis is you have to understand G2B. And the big shift is when a business is thinking about a consumer, a government is not. Government maybe sees voters, but they see industries as instruments of achieving a political or a policy goal. In other words, it's about that big goal. And we've got some of those big goals identified. They're global. The geopolitical ones we're going to lean into much more later. AI, energy, and manufacturing. That's where the world is distilling. But let's also look at the global impact of traditional auto regulations. I'll start with emissions. That used to be about relatively local issues, energy security. Then it became about what? Global climate change. Safety, software-defined vehicles. That new technologies of governmental interest beyond this sector. And Patrick, I think you wanted to talk about consumer protection.
Yeah, just to stress the point of consumer protection, because, I mean, there has always been safety. That's the most important thing if you bring vehicles particularly on the market. And then, of course, in the last 10 years, particularly in the automotive industry, it was very much about environmental protection and emissions in particular, because of the diesel issues. Now we can see a shift more towards consumer protection, and Europe in particular is regulating a lot in this space. So if you look at cars, what was the thing about emissions, the protection of the environment, if you now look at electric vehicles, it's about the driving range, for example. It's about making it clear to customers real driving range. And it's the same discussion as we had with emissions. Like the emissions on the test bench and the real driving emissions, we have exactly the same discussion now with electric vehicles, but it comes from a consumer protection perspective.
All right, so now let's think about what's really driving government. That's a complex topic, but we can focus in an area and get most of the topic covered. We've got competing industrial policies. These gears, they're not grinding, they're grinding. They used to mesh, but the world's changed, and we need to focus on why. After 15 years of negotiation, China entered the WTO on December 11th, 2001. And now we've got to throw some numbers at you. At that time, China had 6% of global industrial output. It had 2 5-year plans, Made in China 2025, the 13th and 14th, they've succeeded spectacularly. Right now, China has 27% of global industrial output. To understand the scale of that significance, that's a bigger slice of a bigger pie. The world economy's gotten bigger, and China's gotten a bigger slice of a bigger pie. The impact of that has been called the China shock. There's some positive things. Prices went down, move to market went quick, but also some dislocation. Industries are having a challenge, jobs are going away, and it's leading to political problems in other places around the world. But here's the really astounding number. The UN says China's share of industrial output in 2030 will be 45%. So that scale is increasing at an increasing rate. We saw some of this reflected in Chancellor Merz's conversation the other day, where he talked about the importance of manufacturing for democracy and peace. What's the United States' response? Well, President Trump said Obama talked about it. He was going to do something about it in his first term. He had some tariffs. Biden and the Democrats complained about tariffs, but when Biden came in, they added to the tariffs and had an industrial policy, $10 trillion over 10 years. Trump comes in, and he has a very different approach. He says, government's the problem. We got to get rid of government. We're not Europe. We're not China. We're going to exit these rules. We're going to deregulate, and we're going to have tariffs. And that's going to make America first and America great, and then we can really lean in. We'll focus on that in a minute. And Europe's response was to analyze itself and had a document called the Competitiveness Compass. And in that document, a complex document, let's just focus on 2 things. It said Europe has a deep innovation gap and it's overregulated, that its zero risk attitude is getting in the way. And that's the different motivations there.
And just to add on Europe, on the competitiveness compass, there is a specific thing for the automotive industry, which is called the Automotive Action Plan. Now, interestingly, it's called the Automotive Action Plan and not the Mobility Action Plan, which is something they should probably consider. It's a great plan. It has a lot of great ideas and input, actually also about tariffs, but then deregulation. So one of the points they address there is the simplification of the automotive regulatory framework. And at the same time, they want to regulate a lot of things to facilitate and booster the automotive industry. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out.
All right. So that we can understand government, we have to see what it's focusing on. And since I'm an American, you expect me to talk a little bit about President Trump, and I'll do that. These are President Trump's focuses. It turns out they're also China's focuses. And it turns out that one of them is Europe's focus, and there might be an issue. So how's President Trump looking at this world? He says he's hearing that energy is an increasingly significant issue for geopolitical competition. So if it's increasingly significant, let's not try and do better. Energy dominance is his goal. And why? The US has a broad and deep energy resource, bigger than any place else in the world. And he says that's an advantage. First of all, we can sell some of it to Europe instead of you guys buying gas from Russia. But it also can map into that manufacturing space, into AI. So energy is an instrument to achieve other goals. Let's go to AI. That's the big game. Both the US and China believe if you don't win that game, you lose the future. And AI is incredibly energy dependent. If you want to know what the critical industry for the US and China is, it's not autos, it's AI. In the US, the Magnificent Seven companies are spending $400 billion of CapEx this calendar year on AI. It's a private-driven enterprise. In China, it's government spent. In Europe, there's really not a response. There's a lot of talk about regulating AI. The idea is that AI will help optimize the energy, maybe solve climate change, but certainly lead into manufacturing. Trump believes that if you can manufacture, you have economic wealth, people are employed, and you're independent. And that will project power and protect in a warfighting situation. We can all think of a situation where American manufacturing was significant. China has that manufacturing. Europe wants to try and maintain it. That synergy is where policy is going. That's where policymakers are focused. And it's in that context that we have to think about EVs and AVs.
So we have a little bit less than 5 minutes to talk about EVs and AVs. So we'll make it through this year. This is basically, we are getting to electric vehicles globally. There's strong sales growth in China, not so much in the US, and actually also Trump is scaling it back a little bit, and it's a little bit mixed in Europe. Europe is torn here. And did you know that if you look at the electric vehicles in Europe, 95%, or even more than 95%, have something Chinese in the vehicles. So we are hugely dependent in Europe on China. And that also explains why there's strong sales growth in China, because they are dominating basically electric vehicles. And we are a little bit torn. We see it, particularly also for environmental reasons. And in the US, they are going back to ICE and the traditional vehicles. Now, also interesting, and maybe I was a bit too quick, there was a study from McKinsey, which 3 things that I want to highlight. First of all, the brand. Once you switch to an electric vehicle, you stay there. So there's a loyalty with the technology, which is electric vehicle. However, there's not so much loyalty in terms of the brand of the electric vehicle. So you switch the brands. And that is very important also for manufacturers to think about, because now they need to offer something more. And that's, for example, software-defined vehicles to be competitive. And the last thing is the price. The price for electric vehicles is the #1 criteria for consumers. And so the luxury brands also will become under pressure when we talk about electric vehicles. Now, these are the main points about electric vehicles. And in the interest of time, we want to highlight the middle one, the regulatory one. And I'll say a few words about Europe, where we have a lot of battery regulations. We have the EU battery regulation, which basically defines the rules of batteries, including batteries in electric vehicles. And it is too much regulated. So it needs more deregulation. The regulation is also delayed because of the complexity. And then I mentioned, or alluded to this earlier, when I said also batteries will be regulated from a consumer protection perspective. So the driving range, what you say about the car and what you experience real driving, the durability of the battery, degradation, this will all be heavily regulated, and you need to understand that if you bring electric vehicles on the market. At the same time, and Chancellor Merz was not that clear, but I think Prime Minister of Bavaria, Söder, was a bit clearer. What about the ICE ban? Will we have it in 2035 or not? And that's another topic for regulation. Tell us a little bit about the US.
Well, in the US, President Trump campaigned against the EV mandate. He said consumers don't want it, so why are we requiring it? And by requiring it, we're just forcing a product made in China onto the American public at a government-subsidized cost. He sees it as part of his deregulatory agenda to get rid of EVs as a mandate.
Now let's talk about AVs as a final 2 slides here. These are probably the main challenges if you want to introduce AVs into the market: regulatory, technology limitations, public acceptance, safety concerns. We could do a poll now, what you think is the #1. But let's focus a little bit on regulatory developments again. From an EU perspective, we have a type approval system, as you know, but it gets a little bit complex here when we talk about AVs, because you have basically 3 layers. You have the normal type approval for the vehicle. You have an additional type approval, so to say, for the ADS, so the system. And then you have a 3rd layer about municipal, city-wise, where do you introduce the vehicles? And you will need to engage with the regulators, with the authorities locally also, to introduce your autonomous vehicles into the market. There's a lot of complexity. On top of that, you have traffic laws that are not harmonized across Europe. So there's a lot of complexity. And maybe you could also tell us a little bit about the US, Lance.
Well, in the US, President Trump sees AVs as part of the AI agenda. And he once had his best buddy, Elon Musk, and Musk said that AVs are really important and the most valuable part of Tesla. So the US is trying to advance AVs. They just don't have a formula on exactly how to do that.
And with that, we ended with this slide that we created actually 5 years ago when we were at CES, Living Mobility with the consumer in the center. If you want to talk with us about it, please come to our booth in A1 or 2, Hall A2, I think.
Just up that aisle.
A1, okay, yeah, just right there. And we will follow up on, particularly on autonomous vehicles and software-defined vehicles on our panel at 11:30 in the Yellow Forum. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you.